Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. Her car was parked out front, her purse was on the kitchen counter, but Ingrid Lyne was gone. And in Seattle, that kind of quiet disappearance doesn't stay quiet for long. The morning of April 9th, 2016 was supposed to be routine. David, Ingrid's ex-husband, pulled up in the driveway of her Renton home to pick up their three daughters. Ingrid had custody that week and was usually punctual. But this time, no one came to the door. He knocked again. No sound. He called. The call rang out. Her car was in the driveway. But there was no sign of Ingrid. David stepped back, unsettled. Ingrid wasn't careless. She didn't vanish without explanation. Not when the girls were waiting. After several unanswered calls, he notified local police, reporting concern for his ex-wife's safety. Officers were dispatched to conduct a welfare check by late morning. Inside the home, the door was locked, and there were no immediate signs of forced entry. Once the police gained access, they found Ingrid's phone, purse, wallet, and keys placed neatly in the kitchen. Lights were off. The bedroom undisturbed. The only thing slightly out of place was the master bathroom. The bathtub had been recently used. Dampness lingered. A white towel sat in the hamper, slightly stained at one edge. Ingrid Lyne was 40 years old, a nurse at Swedish Medical Center, known to her co-workers and friends as compassionate, diligent, and unshakably responsible, especially as a mother. She was divorced, but amicably so. She shared custody with David and was known to plan everything down to the hour. She had no known enemies, no mental health episodes, and no history of vanishing. But by mid-afternoon, she had been missing for nearly 18 hours. As officers processed the home, they didn't immediately file a missing person report. There was no sign of struggle, no blood trails, no overturned furniture, but the unease was growing. A seasoned sergeant noted the house was too normal. In such cases, the absence of evidence was often its own signal. The investigation shifted focus to Ingrid's digital life. Officers obtained access to her phone, reviewing messages and calls. The last known communication was a series of texts exchanged the previous evening. Ingrid had gone on a date. She'd messaged a friend earlier that she was meeting someone new, a man named John, whom she'd met on an online dating app. They planned to attend a Mariners baseball game downtown. The text thread ended abruptly around 10:32 p.m. The final message read, "Home safe, fun night." Then silence. By evening, with Ingrid still missing and no trace of her beyond that final message, a formal missing persons case was opened. Patrol officers canvassed the neighborhood, questioning nearby residents. No one reported hearing or seeing anything unusual. A neighbor's doorbell camera, however, captured a blurry silhouette of a tall male figure leaving Ingrid's property sometime between 1 o'clock and 1:30 a.m. He was walking alone. The footage was vague. Just a body in motion, no clear facial features. But the timestamp gave investigators a working timeline. They began tracing back every movement from the Mariners game to the last message. Swedish Medical Center confirmed Ingrid hadn't shown up for her shift. Her car, still parked outside, was untouched. Her employer and colleagues described her as the kind of nurse who never no-showed, especially not without calling. Detectives also pulled Ingrid's phone records, matching outgoing calls and messages with app usage. The dating app in question, Tinder, confirmed her most recent match as John Charlton. They had exchanged numbers and had been in contact for just under 3 weeks. The platform confirmed their message trail ended the night prior to her disappearance. It was Ingrid's first in-person meeting with him. At this point, police had no direct evidence of foul play, but they also had no indication of a voluntary disappearance. What they did have were indicators of a deliberate effort to vanish without a trace, a pattern rarely matching Ingrid's psychological profile. By the end of the day, detectives quietly flagged the case for homicide review. The house was still, almost staged in its quiet, but for investigators, silence wasn't absence, it was delay, and delays cost cases. By 6 o'clock p.m. on April 9th, 2016, crime scene technicians had returned to Ingrid Lyne's residence in Renton, Washington, with a specific directive: reprocess the master bathroom. This time with UV scanning, trace testing, and fluid-specific reagents, The original walkthrough had logged a freshly used bathtub, faint condensation on the interior tile, and a hand towel damp but folded. No overt signs of violence. But that wasn't unusual. In controlled removals, physical disorder isn't required. What raised flags was the presence of order. In violent scenes, order often hides intention. Technicians began their second sweep with luminol. Within minutes, fine streaks fluoresced along the inner drain, baseboard, and adjacent tile. A single swipe pattern was documented near the base of the vanity cabinet, later matched to diluted hemoglobin. The bleach concentration was higher than household grade, confirmed by vapor trace. The cleaning was systematic but not professional. The towel in the hamper tested positive for phenolphthalein. Blood was present despite no visual saturation. That detail, microscopic, avoidable only by carelessness or time constraints, would anchor the forensic argument that followed. An extraction swab was sent for expedited DNA comparison. Early the next morning, CODIS returned a match, Ingrid Lyne. At this point, the forensic timeline began to build structure. Based on water residue, air exchange rate, and humidity dissipation, specialists placed the last bathtub usage between 10:30 p.m. and 1:30 a.m. This window overlapped with the time frame established from Ingrid's final text and the video footage of an unidentified figure departing her home. Digital evidence was reviewed in parallel. Ingrid's phone had not left her property. However, investigators identified an anomaly, a brief Bluetooth pairing to an unknown secondary device around 11:14 p.m. No further activity followed. The app log from her phone showed her Tinder profile was accessed again shortly after midnight, but not from her handset. This indicated a secondary login, likely through a web session or cloned access. Meanwhile, officers interviewed a neighbor whose driveway security cam had partially captured movement near Ingrid's residence. Upon forensic enhancement, the footage revealed an outline of a tall male walking briskly down the street, head covered, hands in jacket pockets. Timestamp, 1:18 a.m. No license plates, no visible distinguishing features. The footage, though limited, supported the timeline suggested by bathtub residue and text data. Back inside the bathroom, a final forensic anomaly was recorded, a subtle imprint on the bath mat. It had been stepped on while still damp, and when infrared was applied, the shape showed a partial shoe sole, left foot, men's size, likely between 11 and 12. It didn't match anything in Ingrid's home. These were not standalone points, they were converging threads. Water analysis, digital login anomalies, unrecognized shoe print, selective cleaning, and residual blood confirmed two facts. Ingrid had returned home from her date, and something catastrophic had occurred shortly after. Law enforcement hadn't yet classified the case as a homicide. Technically, Ingrid Lyne was still a missing person. But inside the department, detectives were no longer looking for a living victim. By Sunday morning, a specialized evidence response team from King County was deployed to cross-reference the materials recovered from Ingrid's home with data from her phone cloud, cell carrier, and surveillance within a 2-mile radius. The device's location ping showed it hadn't moved past the perimeter of her house since her last text. A neighborhood canvas was reactivated. One resident recalled seeing a man pacing on the corner of 29th Avenue and 16th shortly after midnight. He looked out of place, the witness stated. Didn't belong to this street, no umbrella, just standing there. No direct ID yet, but detectives were beginning to sketch behavioral indicators. In parallel, Swedish Medical Center was notified to prepare formal HR documentation and testimony for Ingrid's professional background. It's standard in cases of high-profile disappearance. Her nursing records were pristine. Her co-workers unanimously described her as stable, structured, and grounded. No history of substance abuse, no romantic entanglements with coworkers, no disciplinary flags. She hadn't called out sick, hadn't indicated distress. This confirmed one point. Ingrid Lyne hadn't walked out of her life. What remained was to determine how and why she'd been forced out of it. It was late Sunday morning, April 10th, 2016, barely 48 hours since Ingrid Lyne had last been seen alive. In Seattle's Central District, just 5 miles from her Renton neighborhood, a man stepped out to take out his recycling. The air was damp. The bins lined the alley as usual. He opened the blue-lidded container, expecting paper and cans. Instead, he found a plastic garbage bag, heavy, not standard waste. Inside, a clear contractor bag. Inside that, what appeared to be human remains. He backed away and called 911. The dispatcher didn't question the urgency. The responding officers sealed the alley within 10 minutes. Crime scene response arrived shortly after. The contents of the bag were transferred into a forensic transport container under a tented privacy enclosure. The bag contained a set of dismembered human remains, specifically a left foot and lower leg, severed below the knee, along with a left arm from the shoulder down. The cuts were methodical. The skin and muscle tissue had been rinsed, partially dried, then wrapped in towels. Medical examiners on site initiated visual triage. No clothing, no jewelry, no markings, just clean, exposed human anatomy, carefully removed. The remains were transported to the King County Medical Examiner's office. Dr. Richard Hariff, Chief Medical Examiner, led the initial assessment. Autopsy protocol began with radiographs, tissue sampling, and DNA swab extraction. Within 6 hours, the DNA profile was matched through the state's lab to Ingrid Lyne. Her disappearance had officially transitioned into a homicide investigation. What stood out was the condition of the remains. The tissue exhibited clean, straight cuts, absent of ragged tearing. Dr. Hariff noted the use of a fine-toothed saw or blade, not surgical but not blunt either. Based on moisture retention and mild desiccation, he placed the time of death within 24 to 36 hours prior. That was consistent with the night of April 8th. Importantly, the method of dismemberment was deliberate. There were no hesitation marks, no evidence of rage-based trauma. This wasn't frenzied violence. It was systematic removal of identity. And for homicide investigators, that carried implications. The bag itself was examined for trace evidence. It matched a common brand found in bulk packaging from local hardware stores. No manufacturer defects, no unique identifiers. The towels inside, however, were not random. One bore a faded tag from a Swedish medical center linen service. Detectives immediately linked that to Ingrid's place of employment. A search warrant was issued to obtain a full linen inventory from her home. Simultaneously, law enforcement mapped the location of the dump site. The alley was residential but intersected with two high-traffic routes. Surveillance canvassing began block by block, collecting security footage from doorbell cameras, storefronts, and apartment complexes. By late afternoon on Sunday, 2 additional calls were placed to Seattle PD, both reporting suspicious trash bags at different locations. One was from a woman who had opened her recycling bin to discard newspapers. The other came from a sanitation worker noting a heavy bag that didn't belong in the pickup. Both sites were within a 2-mile radius of the original discovery. Each new scene was processed the same way. Perimeter secured, forensics deployed, contents photographed, cataloged, and sealed. From these sites, investigators recovered additional body parts, a torso segment, a partial spinal section, a hand, and a partial shoulder blade. The segmentation was consistent with the original discovery. DNA and tissue structure confirmed they belonged to the same victim. One key detail emerged. None of the recovered remains included the head. The absence of the skull limited investigators' ability to confirm cause of death, strangulation, blunt force, or sharp force trauma. But what the killer left behind was enough to confirm intent and escalation. As forensic reports came in, law enforcement requested digital tracking data for any vehicles linked to Ingrid's name. Her SUV was still parked at her home. But license plate recognition technology, installed along major arteries of Seattle, helped map out vehicle traffic for the time window of 10 o'clock p.m. to 3 o'clock a.m. April 8th, 9th. While her car didn't move, an older model sedan, unregistered to her, was logged at 3 of the dump sites within a 4-hour window. The vehicle matched descriptions from neighbors who had noticed a dark vehicle idling with headlights off near the alley that morning. Meanwhile, King County Sheriff's Department escalated the case's public visibility. Press releases confirmed Ingrid Lyne's remains had been recovered. Her family was notified. But key details were withheld from media to preserve forensic integrity. Behind the scenes, the investigation team expanded. Behavioral analysts from the FBI's Seattle field office were briefed. Their assessment supported the initial findings: methodical disposal, low emotional signature, familiarity with anatomy and disposal routes. The killer wasn't improvising. He had a plan. At this stage, the narrative shifted. This was no longer just about locating a missing woman. It was now a citywide manhunt to identify and apprehend whoever had not only killed Ingrid Lyne, but disassembled and distributed her across multiple neighborhoods. Forensic analysis had provided direction, but the case needed acceleration. Every delay risked further contamination, or worse, more victims. By early Monday, April 11, 2016, investigators had transitioned from recovery to pursuit. The discovery of Ingrid Lyne's remains, cleanly dismembered and scattered across Seattle, had confirmed the scope and violence of the crime, but there was still no known suspect, and the head, which could confirm cause of death, remained missing. The case pivoted to digital forensics. A multi-agency task force was activated between the Seattle Police Department's Homicide Unit and King County's Digital Evidence Recovery Section. Their directive was specific: isolate and trace every point of digital contact made by or through Ingrid Lyne's devices in the 72 hours before her disappearance. The forensic team began with her phone. Though physically recovered in her home, her device held behavioral clues, background processes, metadata logs, and handshake records with external hardware. One anomaly stood out. At 11:14 p.m. on April 8th, her phone registered a brief Bluetooth connection to a device labeled generically as XT1095. Investigators identified it as a Motorola mobile device, not one registered to Ingrid. The pairing had lasted under 2 minutes. Using MAC address triangulation and cached IP associations, the unknown device's activity was logged by a nearby Wi-Fi access point in the same neighborhood. Investigators filed a request with the internet service provider to trace ownership and login patterns associated with the MAC address. That data would take days to process, but it was already a lead. Separately, the digital forensics team conducted a recovery of Ingrid's app usage. Her Tinder account had been active through April 8th, with message logs showing one sustained conversation. That contact had been transferred off-platform to SMS the week prior. It was with a man identified in the records as John. Her final outgoing message read, "Home safe. Fun night." Sent at 10:32 p.m. But logs indicated that sometime after midnight, her Tinder account had been accessed again from a different IP address and device type. The session duration was under 90 seconds and showed no message activity, just profile access. This login occurred between 12:06 and 12:07 a.m. The IP belonged to a residential broadband line in Seattle located 6.2 miles from Ingrid's home. When matched to Seattle water utility records, the property had no registered tenants under Ingrid's name. Detectives cross-checked that address with a list of citywide trash locations where human remains had been found. One location, on 21st Avenue, was within 3 blocks of that IP-logged residence. From that point, the pattern tightened. License plate recognition software, previously combed through for movement near Ingrid's house, was redirected to cover a larger grid. Analysts filtered traffic between 10 o'clock p.m. and 3 o'clock a.m. on the night of April 8th. A dark-colored sedan, make confirmed as 2001 Chrysler 300M, was logged at 2 of the drop zones where remains had been discovered. The vehicle was not registered to Ingrid or any of her known contacts, but it was traced to a man living in the Seattle area with prior arrests in multiple states, mostly misdemeanors, some assault-related, one auto theft. His name was added to the person of interest list. Investigators then filed subpoenas for Google location history linked to Ingrid's Gmail account and synced device. Her phone's location history showed a consistent presence at her home until 11:41 p.m. Then, data cut out. No further GPS updates. No activity. The phone had not left the premises but had remained powered for at least 6 more hours. That blackout aligned with the assumption of someone disabling the device's signal manually. No factory reset, no wipe, simply powered off. Quiet. Deliberate. Detectives also examined her SUV. While the vehicle remained at her home, it yielded trace evidence during forensic swabbing. Small amounts of epithelial DNA on the driver's side steering wheel and a smudge print lifted from the interior door handle. The DNA matched Ingrid. The smudge fingerprint was partial, but forensic analysts were able to match it to a print in the National Fingerprint Database. It belonged to the same individual linked to the Chrysler 300M sedan. At this stage, the person of interest was officially identified. Law enforcement had not yet made contact. Surveillance teams were deployed to observe the suspect's address. Warrants were filed to obtain a full criminal history and known associates. The team's strategy was methodical. Collect enough irrefutable physical and digital evidence before approaching. Premature confrontation risked contamination or destruction of devices. Back at the precinct, behavioral analysts were briefed. Their profile flagged concern. The method of dismemberment suggested disassociation, not impulse. Coupled with the digital forensics, Account access, app reuse, and clean technical trails. It indicated someone familiar with how to leave just enough trace to confuse, but not to vanish. In missing person cases, digital signals often tell the final truth. In Ingrid Lyne's case, her devices didn't stop speaking after she went silent. They just spoke in code. Connections, pings, residual fingerprints. Behind every machine was a decision, and behind every decision, someone made it. By the afternoon of April 11, 2016, investigators had more than a name. They had a fingerprint match, a traceable digital connection, surveillance hits on a specific vehicle, and geographic alignment with multiple crime scene disposal points. Now, they were ready to make contact. The suspect was identified as a 37-year-old male with prior arrests spanning 6 states. Nothing in his history suggested premeditated homicide, but his record showed consistent volatility. Alcohol-related offenses, physical altercations, property crimes. He had no fixed employment and drifted between acquaintances and temporary housing. The most recent known address linked to his ID was an apartment in Seattle's Belltown district. Surveillance confirmed activity at that location. Detectives observed him entering and exiting the unit sporadically over a 24-hour period. He did not appear to work. No consistent visitors. At one point, he was seen walking several blocks and returning with a plastic bag from a corner store. Inside, a 6-pack of beer and packaged deli meat. No attempts to flee, no clear awareness of being watched. That evening, the decision was made to initiate a soft approach, non-confrontational, consensual contact. 2 plainclothes detectives from SPD Homicide Unit arrived at the residence just before 6 o'clock p.m. Their tone was polite but firm. They were conducting follow-up related to a missing person case and requested a voluntary interview. The man agreed. No resistance, no legal counsel requested. He was transported to the station, not in handcuffs, not under arrest. The interview was recorded and logged as voluntary. What followed was a 90-minute conversation. From the beginning, he acknowledged having been with Ingrid Lyne. He stated they had met online, spoken for a few weeks, and arranged to attend a baseball game on April 8th. He said he returned to her house with her after the game and stayed for a while. When asked about the rest of the evening, he claimed he got drunk and left sometime after midnight. He could not recall if she was awake or asleep. He said he walked back toward downtown but didn't remember how he got home. When asked directly if he had harmed Ingrid, he denied it. His tone was flat, not hostile. He provided vague descriptions and contradicted himself on small points, such as the time he left and whether he took public transit or walked. At one point, he referred to the Mariners game as happening on Saturday, not Friday. These weren't unusual inconsistencies for someone under pressure, but they were noted. Detectives ended the interview without arrest. He was free to leave, and he did, but the interview room had been swept before and after his presence. He had left behind skin cells on the chair and table surface, collected and logged. His full clothing ensemble was recorded on video. Later analysis showed that his jacket appeared to match a figure seen in one of the alley surveillance clips near a disposal site. The next step was a warrant. Based on the accumulative evidence, fingerprint in Ingrid's vehicle, digital link to her phone, proximity to dump sites, voluntary admission of contact, the King County Superior Court granted a search warrant for his residence. The warrant was executed on April 12th at 7:40 a.m. A tactical entry team secured the scene. Inside the apartment, no signs of struggle, but the environment was disorganized. A black duffel bag near the closet contained used towels, some with faint brown-red staining. A handsaw with a missing blade was found beneath the sink. The bathroom had a bleach bottle, 3/4 empty, resting on the back of the toilet. The most critical find was in the kitchen trash bin. A printed ticket stub, Seattle Mariners versus Oakland Athletics, dated April 8th. Under it, a crumpled plastic bag containing latex gloves, one of which held a small trace of what appeared to be dried blood. All items were cataloged. Swabs were taken. DNA testing would confirm later that the biological material belonged to Ingrid Lyne. At this stage, the suspect's status changed. He was no longer a person of interest. He was now the primary suspect in a first-degree murder investigation. Police reissued a detainment order. He was located that same day near a transit stop downtown. This time, he did not speak. He asked for a lawyer. Some viewers might expect a dramatic standoff or confession. That didn't happen here. What happened was quiet, procedural, and precise. the way these cases often unfold when done right. When asked why he hadn't tried to run, one detective later remarked, "People like him, they don't think they'll be caught. Or maybe they do. They just don't think it matters." On April 13, 2016, just 5 days after Ingrid Lyne was reported missing, the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office filed formal charges against the suspect. One count of murder in the first degree and one count of theft of a motor vehicle. The filing was supported by a consolidated package of forensic evidence: DNA results, video footage, digital logs, physical recovery from the suspect's residence, and most notably, Ingrid's partial remains. In procedural homicide cases, especially those involving dismemberment, the question is not only what happened, but what can be proven. Prosecutors must convert a mosaic of evidence into a linear story, one that will survive cross-examination. In this case, that conversion came quickly. There was no body in full, no eyewitness to the killing, no confession, but there was digital overlap, physical trace, motive opportunity, and concealment behavior. That was enough. The autopsy report was appended to the court record. Due to the incomplete recovery, the medical examiner listed cause of death as homicidal violence and manner of death as homicide. The injuries to the torso and extremities showed post-mortem disarticulation, cuts consistent with a household saw. Toxicology found no significant substances in the remains, suggesting the victim was likely conscious at the time of death. The forensic team also matched micro-traces from Ingrid's car, specifically a small cluster of brown fibers on the floor mat, to a towel found in the suspect's apartment. The match wasn't circumstantial. The towel was a rare discontinued brand, and the thread count and dye composition were distinct. This point tightened the chain of custody between the vehicle and his residence. While detectives finalized their report, prosecutors reviewed the suspect's background. Though his criminal history lacked felonies, his pattern showed instability: transient living, erratic employment, alcohol dependency, and repeat arrests in 6 states. This wasn't a clean slate. It was a fractured one. There were no mental illness flags sufficient for an insanity plea, and no evidence he was under duress. The legal angle was straightforward: deliberate killing, followed by methodical concealment. A press conference was held on the courthouse steps. Seattle Police Chief Kathleen O'Toole appeared alongside representatives from the DA's office and the medical examiner's unit. No sensationalism, just facts. The chief confirmed that the remains of Ingrid Lyne had been recovered in multiple locations, that a suspect had been charged, that the investigation was ongoing, but law enforcement believed the threat to the community had been neutralized. Reporters asked about motive. Officials declined to speculate. They asked whether the head had been found. The answer was no. They asked whether the suspect had confessed. Again, no. The suspect remained in custody on a $5 million bond. His arraignment was scheduled for the following week. The court appointed public defense counsel, but preparations were already underway for a probable cause hearing. Ingrid's family issued a written statement thanking the public for their support and asking for privacy. No cameras, no interviews, just space to grieve. Behind closed doors, the investigative team continued working. They cross-checked the suspect's internet activity, looking for searches on body disposal, decomposition rates, and chemical agents. One search term stood out: how long for body to smell after death. That search had been made at 12:27 a.m. on April 9th. Investigators also requested geofence data from Google to assess whether the suspect's device had traveled near the known dump sites in the relevant timeframes. That request was still pending, but a preliminary tower ping already placed his phone within half a mile of the first bag discovery. The case, now public, generated a wave of commentary. News stations aired the timeline. Online forums speculated. Advocacy groups renewed calls for safer dating app screening. Ingrid's photo, once part of a nurse profile at Swedish Medical Center, was now part of a crime montage. But inside the SPD homicide unit, the reaction was restrained. No victory, no celebration. The lead detective later remarked, "When we confirm the person responsible, that's not closure. That's the beginning of everything else." Because what remains after arrest isn't relief. It's the weight of the unanswered. Why that night? Why that method? Why Ingrid? Not all questions get answers. Some only get documentation. By mid-April 2016, the suspect was formally arraigned in King County Superior Court. He stood mute as the charges were read: first-degree murder, theft of a motor vehicle. No plea was entered that day. His court-appointed defense counsel requested additional time to review discovery. At this stage, the defense had access to the full scope of the prosecution's case: DNA reports, digital metadata, forensic lab documentation, surveillance footage, and the medical examiner's report. All of it pointed in one direction. But legal guilt is not built on direction. It's built on admissible evidence and courtroom rules. The strategy from the defense became clear early. No confession, no statements, no interviews. The suspect declined further questioning. He invoked his right to remain silent, and the legal system respected that. There would be no motive explained, no version of events offered, no justification attempted, just a blank space where accountability should have been. In response, prosecutors tightened the sequence of their physical case. The forensic team confirmed the following. Ingrid's blood was found on the latex glove recovered from the suspect's kitchen. A small fragment of her hair was lodged in the teeth of the saw. The towels used to wrap her dismembered limbs matched the batch issued by Swedish Medical Center. His internet search history included terms related to corpse disposal, decomposition timelines, and water-based chemical cleaning agents. None of these were speculative. Each point had a timestamp, a source, a lab result. What complicated matters was the lack of a definitive cause of death. Without the head, examiners could not confirm strangulation, blunt force, or other trauma. The court accepted the pathologist's finding of homicidal violence, but it left one window open for the defense to argue the killing had not been proven, only the aftermath. To close that gap, prosecutors introduced behavioral analysis. A forensic psychologist reviewed the timeline and disposal patterns. His opinion was blunt. The acts were calculated, not reactionary. Dismemberment was used not just to hide the body, but to fragment the victim. From the outside, the public began asking the questions law enforcement already had. Who was this man? How did he escalate from dating app user to accused killer? Could anything have prevented it? His background remained consistent: unstable housing, long arrest record, but no diagnosed mental illness. A court-ordered psychological evaluation confirmed he was competent to stand trial. He understood the charges, he understood the process, he simply refused to speak. There was no evidence of remorse, but also no displays of rage or instability. He was blank. That blankness became part of the case, because in violent crimes, silence can carry intent. Ingrid's family, through a victim liaison, submitted a victim impact statement to be entered into the record for future sentencing. It read, in part, "She was not disposable. She was not an object. She was our mother, our daughter, our friend." Statements like these often don't make it into news coverage, but in a courtroom, they carry weight, not in law, but in humanity. By the end of April, a trial date was set for later that year. The prosecution was ready. The defense remained silent. The system had moved as fast as it could. But justice, when it finally arrives, rarely feels like enough. On January 5, 2018, John Robert Charlton stood before a King County Superior Court judge to receive the maximum penalty allowed under Washington state law: 333 months in prison, just over 27 years. There were no cameras in the courtroom that day, no televised trial, no spectacle. Only silence, punctuated by the voice of the judge reading the charges, the sentence, and a few short remarks from the victim's family. Charlton had pled guilty in October of the previous year. He waived his right to a trial, opting instead to accept responsibility, at least procedurally, for the brutal killing and dismemberment of Ingrid Lyne. Yet his guilty plea provided little clarity. No official motive was ever disclosed. No apology was offered. There was no letter to the court, no prepared statement, no words of remorse, just a signed admission of guilt. In the words of the prosecutor, the crime was exceptionally heinous, cruel, and depraved. The court did not dispute it. The judge referenced the meticulous nature of the disposal, the digital traceability of Charlton's movements, and the impact on Lyne's family, especially her 3 daughters. The 3,003-month sentence reflected the statutory maximum, but for many, it still felt insufficient. There was no death penalty on the table. Washington had placed a moratorium on capital punishment in 2014, and the state's Supreme Court formally abolished it in 2018, calling it arbitrary and racially biased. Life without parole was also not pursued, likely due to procedural constraints linked to the plea agreement. At the sentencing hearing, one of Ingrid's family members read a statement. They spoke of a woman who worked grueling hospital shifts but still found time to attend dance recitals, chaperone school events, and host Thanksgiving dinners. The voice didn't shake. It was not performative grief, just a measured account of loss, of disruption, of children who now carried absence like a second skin. Charlton did not look at them. The forensic evidence in this case left little room for ambiguity. DNA matched, surveillance footage traced his route, the Uber logs and the hacked Google account had been damning. The timeline held. What remained unresolved was the why. Charlton had a lengthy criminal history, including convictions for assault and theft, and had reportedly battled substance abuse, but none of that answered the core question. Why Ingrid? Why that night? Perhaps the only consistent answer was the randomness of the violence. There was no prior domestic relationship, no custody battle, no financial entanglement, just a woman who went on a date with the wrong man and paid for it with her life. In the months following the conviction, Seattle's local news stations revisited the story, not to relive the details, but to reflect on the risks that modern dating can carry. Experts from law enforcement, victim advocacy groups, and tech privacy circles were interviewed. While no single reform emerged, the case ignited broader conversations about identity verification on dating platforms, digital traceability, and community safety. It also renewed calls for public awareness, how to meet safely, how to vet dates, and when to report suspicious behavior. A modest memorial fund was created in Ingrid Lyne's name. It went towards scholarships for nursing students at the University of Washington, where she had studied. Her former co-workers at Swedish Medical Center contributed quietly. They didn't want interviews. They just wanted to honor someone who had spent her life caring for others. As for Charlton, he will be eligible for release in his 60s, provided he serves his sentence without additional infractions. There is no indication of remorse, rehabilitation, or any meaningful statement of responsibility. To the system, he is a closed case. To those who knew Ingrid, the case is anything but closed. There's a danger in believing that justice ends where sentencing begins. A courtroom is not a cure, it's a conclusion. What remains are the aftershocks, the daughters who still ask questions, the patients who remember her touch, the community that flinched and then moved forward, wounded but awake. This case didn't become a Netflix documentary. It didn't make national headlines for long. But that doesn't lessen its gravity. If anything, it reminds us that not all horror stories scream. Some knock quietly, take everything, and leave behind a silence that never feels quite empty enough. Ingrid Lyne's story is not just about a crime. It's a caution, a heartbreak, and a wake-up call. As someone who's walked through every detail of this case, I'll say this. Trust is precious, but safety is non-negotiable. Know who you're meeting, tell someone where you're going, and never ignore the gut feeling that says something's off. We can't undo what happened to Ingrid, but we can learn from it and protect others. If this video resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Or if something in this story unsettled you, share why. Your voice matters here. And if you want more true stories that dig deeper than headlines, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next case we uncover.